You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and today we're going to tackle the state of Amazon, I think. Give a good friend of the network, and Martin, who's agreed to jump on and just kind of give us what the current state looks like, but also do a deep dive on the business as a whole. And just, you've probably seen him pop up all over LinkedIn, but Martin, I'll kick it over to you. If you want to do a brief intro on yourself and the organization, that'd be great. And we can jump into the conversation. Sound good?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me, Aaron, on the show. Obviously pumped to be here. My name is Martin Heubel. I'm sure some of you have seen me on LinkedIn or also on in other instances all around the internet, or even physically present at some of the events where I attended. I'm a e-commerce strategy consultant helping first-party vendors with Amazon to make sense more of the overall online platform, but also to improve their commercial terms and profit margins with the online retailer. I used to work for Amazon myself as a buyer and senior category manager across different divisions, first in the home housewares department, before I then also took responsibility for the category snacks and desserts, as well as part of the coffee category here in the UK, and also taking a look at the pan-European relationships with some of the vendors. So pretty keen to kind of take a little bit of a deep dive into the state of Amazon right now, where we have seen Amazon going much recently. And then we can potentially also take a quick look at, what the commercial implications for most vendors are and how they can kind of ready themselves for 2023 and 2024, which of course holds quite a lot for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think everybody's trying to figure out if we've looked at what was the crazy swing in 2022 where everybody was doing great. And if we focus kind of on the 1P side to start, and then we hit Q4, Amazon was, cutting the weeks of inventory down. That really, sent a shockwave across a lot of brands who were looking to hit a number and then they didn't, because for 10 weeks they didn't get POs or they trickled in. You end in a year with a bad taste in your mouth. Amazon's still restricting inventory space or cutting more out as they try to struggle to be profitable. And then you enter AVNs. And we don't have to jump in there, but I'd love to hear your kind of take of what is the state of like Amazon right now, and then we can jump in commercial implications for brands.
For sure. Look, I think what we've seen over the last few years is the typical cycle that a lot of the retail space has seen across retailers and online retailers in different kind of parts of the world. We've seen a significant influx of demand from customers due to lockdown restrictions across the key markets in which Amazon has operated in. And it is operating in, which they were actually able to cope with quite well, considering the sudden spike in demand, because they've previously and over the years invested heavily into their fulfillment and fulfillment center network. If you look at how many warehouses Amazon owned, let's say, for example, in 2015, it was only 61. And then in 2020, Amazon increased that to almost 300. So you see the scale of the capital expenditures that Amazon had kind of facilitated and expedited over the years already on the ramp up towards the pandemic, where nobody even knew what was coming their way. So of course, Amazon was able to kind of cope with that demand pretty well. And you also see that when you compare Amazon's year-over-year net sales growth rates compared to the wider e-commerce industry, that Amazon was fairly well off. They usually outpaced the market across the main markets. What you are seeing now is that at the back of 2022, Amazon was, of course, seeing a continued deceleration in demand. So really a sales headwind to their retail organization. And the outlook, the economic outlook, was probably also not as positive, which led them to run and activate certain measures in order to reduce their own risk of not becoming too overstocked in categories where it can become pretty expensive for them to hold a lot of inventory. And this is what everyone was perceiving, especially towards the end of the third quarter in 2022 and then the fourth quarter throughout, where Amazon reduced its inventory coverage to sometimes even only 2 to 4 weeks of typical demand. And if you had any kind of sales drop or a promotion that Amazon matched in the market segment, then of course, you don't need to be a math genius to understand that you are running pretty quickly into some severe availability issues that not only disrupt your overall business, but also reduce and diminish your return on investment from all of the advertising spend that you had activated on those items, resulting in a loss of sales rank and of course also in disappointed customers who weren't able to then actually receive their product or to even check out. And I think this has really thrown a lot of business owners on the side and really kind of rocked their world almost, because this was unprecedented. Before, Amazon was always ordering so much. And now it was the first time where Amazon was really risk averse when it came to the inventory ordering and accepting that there may be even potential interruptions towards end shoppers, one of the consequences.
Yeah, I think you touched on the advertising side, where I had a lot of brands dialing back advertising in Q4, which is usually unheard of, but at the same time, they don't want to go out of stock. And so the companies that could successfully shift the money around, maybe even their number one player, in a category, they're not even advertising anymore, but they're going to the 4, 5, or 6 players just to spend money because they still want to spend it, but they can't go out of stock on that item. But also the craziness that happens when you're number 3 or 4 and number 1 and 2 go out of stock because they're only covering, like, the number that I was crunching was around 0.6 months of inventory, seemed to be like what Amazon was targeting in a lot of categories, which is, like you're saying, just over 2 weeks. That's not a lot. If there's a promotion, people were just out of stock. And then that cascades down. The demand, if people go to buy a toaster, right, and the number 1 seller is not there, the number 2 moves up in the slot, and all of a sudden that captures the sales. And there's this weird cascading effect where things that had never happened before, then they're answering questions internally, like, how did we go out of stock? We were like number 7. We're on page 2, right? Like, we never thought this would happen, but that cascading effect threw everybody a curveball.
Yes, and you see also, that is a very short-sighted decision-making from Amazon's operations and supply chain teams, right? Because what they are looking at is, okay, how can we reduce our risk of becoming overstocked? And how can we transfer this risk back to the brand, so the vendors and suppliers out there? Because in Amazon's world, they just think, okay, these volumes will be sitting in warehouses waiting for us to be pulled by ordering and kind of raising a purchasing order. But in reality, we all know, of course, suppliers are trying then to reallocate this inventory towards other retailers just to get it out of their own warehouses, because otherwise they incur increased cost centers along their P&L, which nobody wants to have sitting there for too long. And this subsequently leads to really these availability disruptions. And if you speak to any kind of supplier, if they look at the forecast, which is always demand oriented, by the way, then it's a headache enough to kind of make sense of it in a normal retail environment. Now we have this kind of risk averseness from Amazon, which is becoming ever more so interrupting the overall business and trade relationship between the retailer, Amazon, and the supplier, whoever it is. And this is really an issue. And you actually see it, or you can find a little bit of reasoning if you look at Amazon's full year results. And if we just kind of zoom out a little bit and take a look at, for example, the first quarter of 2021, Amazon had an operating margin of over 8%. I think it was around 8.1, 8.2%. Now, this operating margin has really plummeted down to, I think, 2 or 1.8% in the fourth quarter of 2022. So this obviously shows that Andy Jassy has really a cost-cutting focus right now across most divisions, whether this is devices, whether this is advertising, or whether this is retail in particular, where he needs to right-size the costs in order to ensure that he's not actually turning a negative operating income or operating margin going forward. And I think this is really the kind of building block that Amazon used to kind of hit the ground on in the back of 2022, and which we are going to see also now in the subsequent quarters. And when you speak to brands right now, I mean, many are seeing again that Amazon is not really accelerating their ordering volume, but maintains it at a very low level. So we see that this kind of risk averseness still maintains and prevails in the trade relationship. And of course, I mean, when you look at current discussions between brands and Amazon, you see that the online retailer tries to give brands more opportunities to kind of utilize programs here in Europe, for example, like Born to Run, where they can raise their own purchasing orders. But it comes with a catch. You as a brand will have to pay Amazon a liquidation fee or accept the return of any kind of product in volume of those purchasing orders that are not being sold after a certain time period. So again, the risk is completely moved towards the supplier side, away from Amazon, which of course is not great, and which of course even smaller brands cannot even afford to take on, because again, it's an additional cost center for them, and they are risking to run more and more out of stock if they are not doing it. So it's certainly a dilemma either way. And this is currently, of course, driving a lot of brands to looking for options to either diversify away from the vendor model, either working with indirect third parties or even becoming a third-party seller themselves, not necessarily from a profitability perspective, such as we had a lot of discussions over the last few years, but more so to just maintain the sales ranks that they have earned so hard and with so much advertising money over the past few years.
Yeah. And I just, when you're talking about like the Q4 profitability, it's just something that came to mind there. It's like, what's really interesting is, so in Q4, Amazon was at the beginning of it, had so many weeks of cover, and then they stopped cutting the POs. So now the outflow is lower, but all you're doing is collecting the cash from the sales. It's going to be artificially high for Q4. Because it's like you bought everything and you took the expense in Q3 and you book it against the books there. And then in Q4, all you're doing is selling and bringing in cash. And so it's a weird way, like, the Q4 model is not sustainable for them because they're going to have to routinely cut POs. And I think that's why when people are coming out of Q4 into Q1, they're like, hey, it's going to get back to normal. It can't get back to normal, really, in a lot of cases, because they're not just floating that cash the whole time. Now you're back to having to cut the real-time POs and dish out the cash to get the inventory to sell. And that puts us in a weird Q1. Right?
Yeah, for sure. And it also, I mean, makes it impossible for a lot of brands to accurately forecast what Amazon is going to order. Because let's not forget, for a lot of brands, Q1 is also the negotiation quarter of their trade terms, where if you don't kind of live up to Amazon's demands, a lot of trade interruption can happen, right? Amazon reducing the sellout on certain items, seizing the buy box, or even not cutting orders to you on the most dilutive ASINs. So I think there's a weird mix where we are coming out of the first quarter, which is still very volatile, which is still under the umbrella of a very cost improvement focus, both from brands and from Amazon. And it really showcases that brands have to kind of wake up to the new reality of 2023, where Amazon will also, outside of these annual negotiations, try to obviously get the best deal for a certain item and try to get either guaranteed margin agreements, cost support agreements, or as they famously call it, matching compensation. So I feel like a lot of brand owners will need to become very sophisticated in the way they engage with Amazon throughout the year in order to maintain decent inventory levels, but also to fight off all of these manual requests for margin compensation that their Amazon buyers are likely to request from them. And here, I mean, it really comes down to the individual situation, of course, of a brand, but as a brand owner, we really need to look at where's our portfolio and how is it structured. Are we really following a full portfolio approach going forward with Amazon, knowing that, of course, profit margin pressure will increase, or are we starting to become more selective of when and how we list our portfolio with the online retailer? And potentially, we are also choosing to not list certain items where we know that the weight and dimensions attributes are similar to the items that Amazon previously has delisted or is constantly chasing us to kind of pay more money for. So why in the world would a brand owner then decide to launch out of the NPD pipeline items that are similar in nature? And I think, of course, I mean, you can always look at it just from the supplier and Amazon relationship, but let's also take it a step further to actually the relationship that matters most in the end, the end shopper relationship. If an end customer comes to Amazon and doesn't find your top selling line items from other retail channels, that poses a problem for brand owners, right? Because of course you can try and have a bigger size or a smaller size or a different size available in general on the Amazon marketplace. And that may be okay in certain categories. But if you're talking about product categories such as home housewares, where usually it's you cannot just variate in size. I mean, for example, if you buy a fridge or if you buy a washing machine, customers expect that they get this model that they got offline also on Amazon, or that they get certain accessories for these items, at least on Amazon. And if you then choose as a brand manufacturer not to list those items because Amazon is constantly chasing you for better margin, then this ultimately impacts customer choice and also the selection that is available on the Amazon marketplace, and can have a detrimental impact on your brand experience. But of course, also leads to frustration, which cannot be directly addressed with Amazon, at least from a retail relationship point of view. And this is where typically then brands consider alternative routes to selling their products on the marketplace, Amazon.
Yeah, so a couple of things I want to pull there. So I pulled out essentially AVNs, right? And then the other thing is the hybrid model, kind of, I think is, at the end there, how else can I sell on Amazon if I choose to? Because of, a couple of different reasons, but mainly being profitability. And that leads into AVNs if you're on. So is there advice that you have? Because there's this old model that was you wait, and you wait as long as you can because the vendor manager's got to hit a number. And if they can get their number from everybody else, there's going to be less pressure on you to get your number. And so, but when everybody plays that game, then nobody wins. And it's just frustrating. And then you end up losing. Everybody loses. And so we'd love to hear your thoughts as we so right now, a lot of brands I'm talking to are either wrapping up AVNs or just wrap them up. And because there's so little talk or knowledge around it, the open conversation, everybody's like, did I win? How do I know if I won? Right? It's like, well, nobody really knows, right? I mean, obviously, if you come out with no cost increases, you're probably doing pretty good. And you're an absolute winner if you can get them to back off on anything. But that just next to never happens. But love to hear your thoughts on AVN.
I think, look, productivity is key in times where brands need to really ensure that each dollar they invest goes further than in previous years. And it depends always on where you really stand. But if you feel that you're overinvested and you wait for your vendor manager to table the next proposal where they are going to, of course, increase investment expectations, that's probably not the right strategy to do. So if you're currently at the beginning of your negotiation, I would say prepare very well and really kind of nominate the top 3 priority items that you need to go out of the negotiation with in order to perceive it as a positive result. This can be to push for cost increases, particularly when you know that your average selling price at an account level has improved over the last 6 to 12 months, which gives you also the room to kind of claw back your margin through a cost increase. This is how it works with Amazon. But also be very clear-eyed that if your ASP is actually decreased, that it's very unlikely that you're going to increase your cost prices with Amazon being a price follower, not a price leader. So you probably need to first go back to your distribution strategy and really ensure that you're not handing out certain incentives to distributors or wholesalers who then diminish your margins on the wider marketplace. In the US, you have the MAP policies that you can also use, which for European brands is not necessarily an option, so it's a little bit more complicated. But still, I mean, Amazon at the end of the day is only the mirror of your distribution strategy. And if you have your distribution in order, then of course you also have more levers to your disposal to actually manipulate the net PPM, so to say, which is what vendor managers are actually obsessing about. So this is typically where you can quickly assess whether you can kind of win or lose on the cost price front, which forms your front margin. But of course, the front margin is only one part of your overall negotiation aspect. You also need to take a look at your back margin. This typically is formed by your trading terms with Amazon. And here I would just encourage brand owners really to take a look at their current setup and where they're invested in. You can typically do a little bit like a Boston Consulting matrix style, where you kind of define 4 quadrants. You look at where do you get a good return on investment and a low return on investment, and what are the terms from which you get a good growth impact, and where do you get a low growth impact from. Then you have these 4 kind of buckets, and you can kind of really highlight where you're currently over invested. And if it's in something where you don't get any growth from, and you also do not get any other return on investment from a profitability perspective, then it's a good idea to kind of tackle that in your negotiation and to ensure that you are divesting from buckets where you really get no ROI and moving and shifting certain items towards the fields where you know that you can at least get a better growth impact or return on investment from. And I think this can in itself be seen nowadays as a good negotiation win. But of course, if you're going to address terms in the sense that you want to reduce them, you need to become much more sophisticated, and you need to also have really a proactive role in highlighting to your vendor manager how you're going to recover for them the lost net PPM or lost margin for Amazon, so to say, that you're taking out through reducing your trading terms. And you have different levers available, right? You can say, okay, we are reducing our terms by, let's say, for example, 2%. And we are very keen to kind of offset that loss by improving our joint supply chain. We potentially can offer you, dear Amazon, to source these products directly from China, which comes for you at kind of different variable cost structures and savings along your variable handling and shipping costs. And for us, it also saves us costs because we do not have to ship it to the US or to mainland Europe in the first place. We can also work on full pallet and full truckload ordering for our domestic business, which again jointly reduces the kind of friction, but also the costs that are currently sitting in the supply chain. You can also look at a proactive management of your overall portfolio, which can as well reduce your overall gap in terms of the margin. And you can, of course, also look at other different levers to just like shift your advertising and your promotional spend towards products that are mutually accretive, not only to your profit margins, but also to Amazon's net PPM, and increase your share, so to say, of the promotional share, the advertising share of these items that you are materializing your investments on. Of course, there are other levers available, such as launching exclusive products, such as rationalizing your portfolio. I think 2023 is certainly the year where you should critically take a look at whether you need to have 3 different sizes of the same product on Amazon available, or whether you can consolidate that, or maybe even launch a hard bundle instead, which again drives up your ASP and MSRP levels and can also reduce the variable handling and shipping costs in relation to that. But I think you really need to kind of improve the sophistication of preparedness in those negotiations and really follow a data-driven approach, so that if you're proposing to Amazon that you have to reduce your terms or you have to increase your cost prices, you also have the really supporting story readily available to highlight how you're going to stabilize their margin. Because at the end of the day, Amazon is a retailer, they need to make money as well. They will not just simply accept a lower margin going forward.
Right. I mean, Jeff came out right originally and said, hey, your margin is my opportunity. They're coming for it. But I think you're right on the preparedness side. I mean, I know you're right, because for a lot of years, there's this assumption that your vendor manager really understood business, and they don't always. They're really, really smart people, highly educated, and they really, really understand Amazon, but the holistic approach to a business. And so you have companies, even large, Fortune 500 companies, that have no idea how to deal with Amazon. And they make this assumption that the vendor manager really knows business. And so they're going in there saying, hey, we're here to partner with you to win. And the vendor manager's like, this is awesome. Give me more money and we'll grow. And they give them a little more money because they assume that's the way it has to work. And then they give them a little more money. And then now, right, we hit 2022 and profitability's a disaster. Right. And now we've got this chance for AVNs when you're going in there. I completely agree. You set the tone. You come in with the plan. you share with them, you educate what the goals are, obviously with the mindset that you want to grow Amazon, but you want to grow profitability for both you and them. Yeah. And you can't just walk in there now and say, hey, I'm here. Let's talk partnership, because they're going to eat your lunch. They're literally going to eat your lunch. And you're going to walk out of there saying, do you think we won? And this time next year in 2024, if you come out not knowing if you won, right, then you lost. That's the reality. Everybody knows when they 100%.
And I think also think about the fact that, I mean, a lot of brands are still fortunate enough to have somebody sitting on the other side of the negotiation table. The reality for a lot of mid-sized to small-sized brands and vendors is a completely different one. Here, once per year, they receive an email or a window pops up in Vendor Central saying, hey, it's time to negotiate. Either you give us 2% more damage allowance or 2% more of a quick pay discount. You choose. So imagine you don't even have somebody sitting on the other side. And I think this segues us a little bit into the topic of where Amazon is going towards to in the future. And this is a more automated future in its retail operation. And we're already seeing that being in full swing, right? If you look at what's happening over the last, I would say, 12 months to probably even 5 years, you have corporate restructuring, particularly in Europe, where Amazon doesn't want to engage with vendors anymore at a local level, so not in Germany or only in the UK, but rather wants to elevate this at a pan-European level, where one vendor manager talks to a brand on behalf of all of the individual markets, which of course reduces their requirements for a lot of headcount resources and also makes it a little bit more easier to harmonize the cost structures in individual markets. You see that Amazon has rid himself, and this was big in the news a couple of months ago, from distributor relationships here in Europe that interfered with the direct relationship between Amazon and manufacturing brands, also to kind of ensure that the selection availability is there and that they also get the best price possible. Because as you rightfully said earlier, the margin of a distributor in order to fund its business model is Amazon's opportunity to just like double down on the direct manufacturing relationship. And then you also see this really notorious automation focus when it comes to forecasting, order management, catalog management, vendor support services, which are similar to the seller support services, not really at the greatest quality level ever, but they still kind of are trying to automate that more and more. And of course, you also see the organizational kind of cost reduction efforts that Amazon does by reducing its headcount, by automating the supplier management as much as possible, and by offshoring a lot of the resources that previously were done by individuals, such as the strategic Amazon service, or as it's known here in Europe, the Amazon vendor service. And if you as a brand owner are not prepared for this automation focus, then you're also not prepared for this silent process ownership and resource ownership transfer that is currently happening. Because think about it this way, previously, Amazon did a lot of these things for you. You could work with them so that your vendor manager or your brand specialist were raising orders for new items. Now Amazon tells you, okay, look, here is a tool born to run. You can do it yourself now. So all of a sudden, this process of raising the orders for new items and the risk associated to it was silently transferred from Amazon to the brand. And it happens across the board when it comes to order management, when it comes to the catalog management. I mean, who is changing and fixing the catalog? Amazon isn't. It's really on brands to monitor their listing quality and to update the catalog if it's overridden, even though it's kind of, in quotation marks, Amazon's system fault that it happens in the first place. Financial processes, when it comes to the financial auditing, the disputing management of chargebacks, of shortages, of co-op deductions. Amazon just says, if you don't dispute it within a given time period, then we are clearing it as a good guy in our P&L. So it's you as the brand owner who has to kind of really own all of these processes. And if you're not aware of that and you think that Amazon will take the lead in the business relationship with you, I think it really puts you in a very detrimental spot where you will close your shop after a few months or even years if you can afford it, because you've bleeded to death in terms of your profit margins.
Yeah, I don't know how much executive teams realize. Actually, I do know. Most executive teams don't realize how complicated Amazon is getting. And so it's conversations I'm having right now. Everybody's tightening their belt and they might be looking at, bringing stuff in-house rather than paying an agency.
Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes that's okay, but it's not easy to have a single person or two people that understand the intricacies of all of that. And it's just in the absence of knowledge, right? People, oversimplify and assume the worst. And that's what's happening real time right now. While Amazon's getting even more complicated, it's kind of the executive teams are blind to it. Not purposefully, they just don't live in the day to day and they're not catching those nuances like you're pointing out that people are like, and there's a ton of people are going to listen to like, oh my, that's right. That literally just happened. They transferred that responsibility to me. And this
is why it's a silent ownership transfer, right? Because it's very subtle. You almost don't realize it. You just take it on because it didn't work once when you requested your brand specialist to raise this order and they gave you a different solution. So you trialed it and all of a sudden it's the new standard operating procedure for you, right? And if you're lucky, you've already outsourced it to a resource that is not as costly as a highly educated account manager with a very expensive salary. But if you haven't done that, then all of a sudden you have very expensive headcount resources doing very basic and repetitive tasks. And the way that I always kind of highlight to clients they should kind of capture these is by asking their teams across departments that have to do and have ownership with Amazon to just note down the tasks that they're kind of conducting on the Amazon account at least twice per week. So where is the repetition? And then to really cluster them into high effort, high value, low effort, low value, and so on. So different clusters. And then to really prioritize the either outsourcing or automation of these tasks based on how much time they actually consume and what the actual outcome of these tasks are and is. And of course, it will always depend on the individual business case. But I think a lot of brands, whether those are Fortune 500 companies or smaller brands, there are service providers out there where you can offshore a lot of this or even automate it. And this is certainly the direction of travel. You need to kind of find ways to automate a lot of the manual stuff that is currently happening, whether you're aware of it or not. I think this is a work stream which you should initiate over the next probably 6 to 12 months by really identifying what are the processes that are really eating into your resources and that kind of are creating indirect cost centers, sometimes in the support functions such as your legal department, your finance department, your cash to order department, whoever it is, right? But if you're adding resources in order to manage a growing Amazon account, it's also time to critically question and ask, okay, is there a way to automate or to offshore and outsource this task to somebody who can do it at a much more affordable rate, so to say?
Is this like a short course you offer? Like if you had like a handbook that just walked through, like doesn't matter how many you printed, you'd sell out, right? Because like
I think it's an interesting one, right? Because at the end of the day, it's very dynamic, and you see that these changes they are happening at a very fast pace. Like 12 months ago, nobody was talking about the automation, but now in hindsight, a lot of these brands are seeing that, of course, Amazon cannot kind of hire as many kind of warehouse workers, as many corporate workers, based on the exponential growth that it has seen over the last few years. So, of course, it's kind of the natural consequence. But I think everyone still thinks that Amazon will do it and Amazon will solve the problem. And in part, they will. Their systems will become better when it comes to catalog management, when it comes to order management. But I mean, of course, they're also introducing then new stuff, new processes, new tools, which need to be managed. And I think the general direction of travel is really to kind of prepare yourself to be as proactive and as independent from Amazon and their kind of management as possible.
Yeah, I think if there were a yearly book, the most recently out of date, up to date Amazon, it's 15 pages. Here's what happened over the past year. This is where you unknowingly accepted responsibility for doing these things. And then here's the steps. You need to analyze everybody on your team and what they're doing on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. Here's the format to box it in. Here's different people that you should be using instead of those people. or
Yeah.
here's your total opportunity cost. Everybody wants to do that, but nobody has the time to put it all together because they're busy running the day to day. But if they had a annual workshop, a 3-day workshop where they did this, like I think
it's one of the service offerings that I need to add, I think, after speaking to you.
Yeah.
I think capturing it is the critical part here, right?
Yeah.
Because you have two enemies. You have the enemy of fractional ownership. And that doesn't even matter when you talk about automation. That also matters when you're just looking at your overall P&L, because every team owns a different part of it. Your commercial team owns the cost prices and trading terms. Then you have your finance department or logistics department that looks at chargebacks and shortages. But nobody often looks at it all in one place and together. So you don't even know your total cost to serve Amazon, and often, especially if you are in large organizations. And now you have also the kind of second enemy, which is automation, which eats your lunch in a very hidden way, unless you kind of call it out very proactively, because otherwise every one of these fractionalized departments is asking for more headcount, and you don't know, okay, why am I actually adding this headcount? Okay, I have a larger Amazon business, but does the size of revenue and the growth of revenue with Amazon really has to correlate with my headcounts requirements? And I would say and make a strong statement that no, it doesn't have to. But I think, this is, I think, certainly what needs to be on top of mind for a lot of business leaders, particularly in the more senior positions over the next 6 to 12 months for sure.
Yeah, and they need somebody from the outside to come in, right? For whatever reason, there's more credibility, which drives the people who are doing the job absolutely bonkers. Like I've got a friend who retired, and then they really needed him. They brought him back as a consultant. And I was like, hey, how's that going? He's like, amazing. I'm a consultant. Everybody listens to me now.
Well, it always depends, right? I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the executive team,
you have brands that are very
suite. Yeah.
You have some brands that are very open-minded, and you have others that, of course, are also very reluctant to change. And both is fine, right? But I think the reality is that Amazon will not kind of lean against certain brands. And if you're not large enough, if you're not an Apple or Nike or whoever you are, right? If you're not the number 1 or 2 in your category, you'll need to ready yourself that Amazon is moving towards a direction which you may not like. And you also see that by just asking yourself the question, okay, when have you spoken the last time to a really senior leader in the Amazon organization? So to a senior category leader or even a sales director. And if the answer is that you haven't done that over the last 6 or 12 months, chances are that you are already very much deep into this automation process without even realizing it.
So a couple of things that I want to make sure is, what about the hybrid approach? Because what was interesting, what you were saying is people are getting more selective. Then Amazon is not going to be the everything store, right? It used to be every size, every shape, every color, every case pack, everything was up there. And now we need to be more selective with the ones that are going to be profitable. But is it going away from the everything store? And the other thing is, what about the hybrid strategy? And then, we can kind of, couple big ones. We only got a few minutes left, but a couple big ones.
I'll make it short and sweet. So I think, yes, we are leaving the time where Amazon is wanting to have everything at every price point. So we saw a large push towards low ASP items across North American and European markets at the beginning of the pandemic. I think this is going to cease to exist, and you will see that both from an automated and from a manual intervention point of view, Amazon will reintroduce larger bundles, whether they're virtual or whether you upload them as a hard bundle. It's certainly the direction of travel. And it is to a certain extent also up to brands how much of their selection they're going to offer. Because even if it doesn't make sense to list it any longer via 1P or Vendor Central, and you make the conscious decision that you do not want to offer certain items to Amazon because it will just pressure your net PPM further, there's still a case to be made to diversify away from Vendor Central towards Seller Central in certain cases, particularly when you talk about very tough negotiations that you've had over the past, where you want to ensure that you are not to 100% at least affected by sales interruptions or punitive measures of your Amazon buyer. When they cease the buy box, when they stop ordering temporarily in order to pressure you to kind of improve your cost support agreements or your trading terms in general. And then I think I see a lot of brands currently strategizing around how a hybrid model could look like. So ultimately, it is also up to the brand to ensure that their selection is offered as widely as possible. But they have to become a little bit more smart around who and how they're offering it via the business models that Amazon offers them. There are 4 in total. You can either be directly yourself as a manufacturer, a vendor, or seller, or you can work with a distributor or third-party provider that is a third-party seller or a vendor to Amazon itself, and to offshore your costs basically into 2 main P&Ls, the direct and the indirect one, which then gives you a weighted average on how to manage your Amazon business as well, which could be something in which I believe a lot of brands are going towards, even more so now that we are leaving the very tough negotiation season of 2023.
Yeah, it's just anybody who is still viewing Amazon as a traditional retailer is completely missing the mark, right? That hope is now gone, right?
Yes and no, right? They're behaving more and more than like a traditional retailer with their margin demands, and how they also are willing to cut selection, which I think was not happening before. But as you know, yes, if you're talking about, and we hinted upon it, the automating, the corporate restructuring, I think this is where you really see that Amazon is very willing to innovate. It's not disruptive innovation per se, but it is very incremental, subtle innovation that a lot of brands may miss if they are not really focused on their e-commerce operations.
Yeah. Awesome. Any questions for me? I've just picked your brain.
Yeah, sure. It was a pleasure. Aaron, what are you seeing currently as trends when you're talking to your clients and to the industry?
The biggest trend right now is how to do more with less. I think we see a consolidation of service providers, while over the past couple of years, and this is both on Amazon, the direct-to-consumer side, more and more, every time there's a service provider that could potentially help out, it's a low cost. I went ahead and grabbed them, and now I've got a really big tech stack, whether it's helping out with Amazon or it's my direct-to-consumer site. And so I'm having a lot of conversations around what does the rationalization of those service providers look like? Who do I get the most bang for my buck for? Who do I just break even? And then there's a lot of consolidation where, the PE VC money isn't flowing like it was before. And so there's a lot of just companies not quite making it, not continuing to get funding. But it is, how do we understand this new state of e-commerce? Obviously generative AI, right after this, we're doing a webinar. There's probably going to be 200 to 250 brands on just to learn that space as a whole. Because I think in that case, I have 90% of people sticking their head in the sand saying, maybe we'll wait and see how it affects. It's not really, we know, I just don't want to see everything that's happening. Then I've got 10% that are going all in, and AI, that's here to stay. It's, they drop the chat GPT because it's more than the written word. It's generating videos and it's generating, images. It's crazy. But so a couple of things that generative AI, we just have to bring it up. But nobody has quite perfected it obviously yet. But the other one is, how do I do more with less, but still perform and grow?
I think this is the wider, we will see it across categories, right? Everyone has to kind of tighten the belt a little bit. I believe we will see, depending on how the economic environment will be towards the end of the year, again, a craze towards trying to capture as many sales as possible in the fourth quarter. But I think brands will become a little bit more sophisticated in the way they are kind of planning and executing these. And of course, also the summer period will decide on how actually the inventory management and demand forecasting is going to pan out.
Yeah. What gets you most excited? What are you most pumped for in the next, 9 months or a year?
I think it's very exciting to me to now see that, of course, we've seen over the last few years a lot of tremendous sales growth, but I think we are now finally at the stage where we need to become real about what is sustainable and how we can also treat Amazon and the e-commerce channel as a more mature channel. And a lot of brands, I think, will wake up to ensure that they have the right selection available. I'm very excited that e-commerce will, for many brands and many large multinationals, for the first time, be significant enough to actually dedicate selection that is exclusive to the channel and more unique to the channel when it also comes to packaging and the environmental impact of it. And that, of course, will also kind of spin the flywheel even further. It will mean that you not have 100% of selection parity across channels necessarily, but it will mean that you have selection parity in the sense that you have, for the same brand, for the same product, more dedicated versions for the respective channel, which ultimately will drive down costs. And of course, also gives exciting new opportunities to kind of drive innovation and test and learn approaches at a more lean cost model that is kind of subject and tailored to the individual channel, where exactly, of course, e-commerce, and with e-commerce also Amazon, will be predestinated players to kind of do that. And I think that's where I'm personally, but also most brand owners are hopefully excited for. Of course, it will come with challenges, but we wouldn't be in the business and wouldn't be working in e-commerce if that would be the case, if we wouldn't like that.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun, obviously, with the challenges.
Absolutely.
For sure. Well, Martin, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for jumping on, helping educate the community here. Really appreciate you and your time. And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Digital Deep Dive. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. All righty. Thanks again, Martin. We'll see you.
Thanks, Aaron.